Welcome to the Cannabis Review, everybody. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope everybody's doing well out there. We're very lucky today. We've got an amazing guest on, one of the top journalists and an author at Hemp Industry Daily. Her name is Monica Raymunt. How are you keeping, Monica? You well?
I'm hanging in there. Thanks so much, Owen. Great to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think the easiest thing to do is maybe just let everybody get an introduction. Do you want to explain to everybody what it is you do and your position in the industry?
Sure, happy to do that. So I've been working for Hemp Industry Daily since the beginning of the year. Before that, I was working as an editor for DPA, which is the German press agency here in Germany. And prior to that, I was writing for Reuters and freelancing a bit. But yeah, my background is more on sort of general news, financial news, and that kind of reporting. And I was brought on by Hemp Industry Daily to cover the international markets for industrial hemp and CBD. So that's what I've been doing so far.
Okay, excellent. So we've pretty much got a top-notch person to be able to help us through these next 4 segments. So I'm just going to jump straight in there. And the first one is pretty much the recent news that there's a change of 0.2% to 0.3% of THC content in hemp that's happened in Europe recently. Can you explain what exactly are the ramifications of that and how that came about?
Sure, Owen, sure. Happy to tackle that. Well, the first thing I would say is that that change isn't necessarily one and done. Basically, what happened was that the European Parliament voted on a number of amendments to the CAP reform, which is the Common Agriculture Policy. Europe basically has this big overarching subsidies program, and they're looking to basically redo it for post-2020. And hemp, the level of THC in hemp was added as one of the amendments to this reform. And the European Parliament voted on it and they passed it. And so they now have their negotiating position. And what happens now is that the negotiators from the European Parliament are going to go and meet with the Council of the European Union, which are the ministers from European member states or the EU member states, and then also negotiators from the European Commission. And they're going to have sort of trilateral talks about the reforms, not just on hemp, not just on this increase in THC levels, but also on a whole number of other changes that are in the CAP reforms. Now, I've spoken with a press person at the European Parliament, and he told me he anticipates that those trilateral meetings are going to start sometime in mid-November. So that's sort of where things stand. I know the European Industrial Hemp Association is really jazzed about what this potentially could mean for the hemp industry in Europe. Indeed, they are talking about the fact that it could open the door to some other varieties and potentially open the door to specifically varieties that have more CBD or a stronger profile of cannabinoids. So I think there's definitely a lot of excitement about what it could mean, but it's, we shouldn't count our chickens just yet.
Okay, that's good to know. It's kind of maybe not get too carried away. I've seen a lot of press and you see a lot of posts online. I think people are trying to run away with this, thinking it's a done deal. And as I said, these are kind of good segments to be able to put everybody in the educated perspective and with the thought of new genetics and new plants. I think is definitely something that should excite if that does end up going ahead with everybody. So the next thing I want to move on to is this UN Commission on Narcotics Drug, the December vote that's happening. Could you maybe outline to the audience what exactly is happening in this December vote and what's up for grabs?
Sure, sure. I can do my best to summarize that. So basically, the World Health Organization has proposed 6 changes to its narcotics treaties. There's these international conventions that a whole slew of countries have signed up for. Now, no, it's a treaty. It's not law that can be broken. So that has to do more with how the treaties are sort of enforced or carried out. But basically, the WHO made these recommendations, these 6 recommendations, 2 of which would sort of touch on the CBD industry. The first 3 sort of touch more on THC levels, but recommendations 5.4 and 5.5 are specifically connected to CBD. The 5.4 would actually remove extracts, delete extracts and tinctures of cannabis from the convention, but that's more has to do with language and sort of a redundancy with language and meanings. So it's not really consequential. But 5.5, this recommendation 5.5 from the WHO would add a footnote that would basically exclude preparations of predominantly CBD with less than 0.2% THC from international control. And this is the footnote that's got a lot of people excited and sort of hopeful about what it could mean for the hemp and CBD industries. Now, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, they're coming together on December 2nd through the 4th, and they're going to be voting on these recommendations. And there's a lot of discussion about which countries are going to vote in favor, which countries are going to be voting against. And my colleague Alfredo and I have been covering some of these preliminary meetings that have been held in the lead up to the vote, and sort of following, which way the EU, which way the United States, which way a lot of other countries are leaning. And I can tell you that the European Union didn't really come out and sort of say which way they were leaning at the most recent meeting. The United States has come out and said it's not in support of the footnote for CBD. But I think that's more on a technicality because of the language. It's not necessarily because it thinks that CBD should be under international control. A lot of times the opposition to some of these changes tend to be more nitty gritty and more about the language than it has to do with the overarching concept. So I think I've summarized it. I hope I did an okay job.
You did indeed brilliantly. And a little follow on from that, obviously with the big pharma kind of getting in and making synthetic CBD, do you think that there's an element of their lobbying is going to be far superior, far more financially backed than the regular hemp farmers, and they might be able to sneak in that basically they only want synthetic CBD to be sold via pharmaceuticals or with ingredients that they would have come up with themselves? Do you see that being an issue?
Well, I mean, synthetic CBD doesn't really come into question with the narcotics conventions. So all of the controversy surrounding CBD and the narcotics convention stems from the inclusion of cannabis and preparations derived from cannabis, and the fact that the hemp plant is cannabis, even though it has a much lower level of THC than the narcotic cannabis or marijuana. Some authorities say that doesn't really matter. Technically, it's covered by these treaties. With synthetic CBD, you don't run into that problem. That's a perfect example. Like here in the European Union, the EU has said that synthetic CBD is not covered as something that needs to be regulated in the same way that hemp-derived CBD does. But I think there is a lot of discussion about this tension that exists, I think, over CBD, that you have sort of on the one side, the wellness industry, health and wellness industry that sees a lot of potential for how it can be used. And then you have the pharmaceutical industry that feels it should be heavily regulated and there needs to be more of a science-backed approach. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the wellness industry wants that science-backed approach as well. But I think they're sort of, there's this tension over how ultimately it's going to be regulated and who sort of gets the final say on it. And yeah, we're sort of in this really exciting time to see where the chips fall, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's more of a fear from some people that we've talked that it again, if the synthetic CBD is not regulated, then big pharma is within every right to lobby to ensure that cannabis stays as a narcotic drug and the derived elements from it aren't allowed to be processed. So I think, yeah, it's something that we shall see over time how this one plays out. The next one I wanted to jump onto was a big topic that I know everybody's going to want to know a lot about. It's food and beverages with CBD. So we know about the novel food license and we know about the deadline that's happening next March. Can you outline to people how you see that industry going, how it looks at the moment and what the future of it may be?
Sure. I mean, that is sort of the million or billion-dollar question, depending on who you talk to. I guess I would start out by saying that in Europe, or at least in the European Union, so not counting Norway, not counting Switzerland, and no longer counting the UK, um, cannabinoids, specifically CBD, are regulated by the novel food regulation under EU law, and that regulation is actually a pre-market authorization process that is supposed to be followed by market players, which means CBD products that are edible, that are on the market, actually needed to have received approval from authorities before going on the market. And the issue with that is that basically the European Union or the European Commission was a bit late to the party in realizing that CBD products were already on the market. It was in 2019 that they said, okay, CBD is a novel food. It needs to go through these steps in order to get onto the market. But by that time, CBD products had already proliferated across Europe, and there wasn't really sort of a unified approach to regulating it. You had some countries' authorities that were more strict on taking it off the shelves or shutting down head shops that had those products or removing them from the shelves, and you had other authorities that weren't. So long story short, CBD products like CBD food and beverages that are on the market right now in the EU, many of them are produced at a very high quality with lots of tests and laboratory certification showing that they have no heavy metals, that they have no pesticides, et cetera, et cetera. But there are other products that don't have that. There's sort of there's this there's an unequal sort of, it's an unequal playing field right now, and that was the issue. That's the issue that the EU authorities currently face with the market and trying to regulate it. The UK also had this problem, and what they did is they came out and they said, okay, we're setting a deadline, March 2021. Any CBD product that's edible, that's on the market right now, needs to have a novel foods application validated by that date. And no other additional CBD foods and beverages were allowed to enter the market after that point in time, after that announcement. And so the UK really stepped up and said, okay, we're gonna take the bull by the horns and try to get the market in order. The EU is sort of taking a different approach because they are evaluating whether or not CBD should be regulated as a narcotic rather than a food. Again, under the UN narcotics treaties. So if we're talking about what the future of the CBD food and beverage market looks like in Europe, I think there's a lot of excitement about what it could be once the industry sort of, gets together and establishes what the ground rules are, what the testing criteria need to be. I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of studies that have been done about consumer interest in CBD foods and beverages and supplements, and a lot of estimates about what kind of growth the market could see over the next 5 years. But a lot of that is dependent on what shakes out with the regulations, what the European Commission ultimately decides to do. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the three biggest events that are coming up for CBD in Europe. You have a case coming up with the Court of Justice of the European Union, known as the Cannabis case, and that basically will decide whether or not France's ban on CBD products is legal. It has to do with the freedom of movement principle in Europe. And then you have the European Commission deciding at some point this year about whether or not CBD should be treated as a narcotic or as a novel food. And then you have the UN vote, the CND vote in December, voting on the WHO recommendations for scheduling cannabis and cannabis-related substances. So it's a really exciting time for CBD, especially when it comes to food and beverages. I do think that the market will find a way forward. I think that it represents not just something exciting for the businesses and people in the industry, but also consumers. I think what I'm seeing and hearing is that a lot of consumers appreciate what they can get from CBD in terms of its therapeutic benefits. And I think a lot of a lot of people want to see it remain on the market. So yeah, that's sort of my assessment.
Excellent. Now, very insightful, I think, and a lot of education for viewers watching this show. Very last topic I would just want to touch on and quick briefly on this is the future of hemp in Europe. How do you see the next couple of years planning out?
Well, that's a really big question. And I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. It's really hard for me to say. And I've also, only been covering this industry for a very short period of time. So I just want to hedge my response.
Well, let me try and refine the question a little bit further for you. Do you see a scenario where departments of agriculture across Europe and various countries are funding the growth of hemp in their country, or if not, at least providing subsidies for farmers to do so?
Well, I think, farmers are currently able to get subsidies from the EU for hemp. Hemp is allowed to be grown under EU law, and in Italy, for example, they had farmers that were applying for EU subsidies, and it can be funded. The problem is that a lot of agricultural ministries don't actually keep close tabs on how much is being grown or who's growing it. And I think there's a lot of potential for the crop, especially given the European Union's aspirations when it comes to reducing carbon emissions and kind of trying to slow climate change or global warming. I think the hemp crop or the hemp plant represents a big opportunity in a lot of ways. For example, if you're talking about the construction industry and all of the waste that is being produced from that particular activity or that particular industry, hemp, could be a big help in terms of being a carbon sink, in terms of its absorption of carbon and being used as insulation or being used in other building materials. That could go a long way in reducing the carbon emissions for the construction industry. For fiber and seeds, there are also a ton of opportunities, I think, as well. I think, I guess I would say hemp has a lot of potential to be part of this bigger picture, this bigger sort of greener future for Europe. And I think there are a lot of advantages to inserting that crop into that larger plan.
That's been an excellent answer and a highly insightful episode of the show. You've answered all those 4 segments, I think, very well for all of our viewers that are going to be watching this. So I can't thank you enough for your time, and hopefully we'll get you on back in a couple of months and we can review the various big things that have happened in 2020 regarding CBD. So thanks very much for your time, Monica.
Thanks so much, Owen. It was a pleasure.
Cheers, everybody, for watching. We'll be back again next week with another show.